Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL division previews continue. And from the north, we head south, starting with the AFC. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, we have officially reached the midway point. When we wrap up this podcast, we'll be 5/8 of the way through division previews, which can only mean one thing. The season is rapidly approaching.
I agree with that last statement, that the season is rapidly approaching. From the north, we go south. Where does that put us right now?
What do you mean, where is that? Oh, I mean, are we trying to set up the geography?
To the south, yeah. Did we stop anywhere in between?
I mean, we might have taken a lunch break somewhere in Gary, Indiana, when we went from the Chicago Bears en route to Indianapolis if we wanted, before we headed down to Nashville. A little trip to Jacksonville, and then we can head west to Houston, should you be so inclined.
Speaking of Indiana, right, we're potentially trying to line up an in-season trip, but it doesn't sound like it's going very well.
I mean, look, I'm not necessarily consulted. I offered up my availability. I cleared out the weekend on the calendar, but there are two other very interested parties that would have blood pressure that could potentially escalate there.
I don't.
That have to bury the hatchet if they want to go.
I don't. No, I'm good, but yeah. Okay.
All right, you want to talk Houston Texans?
Let's do it. I didn't realize that this division's so shitty and there's so much variance that the notes section, you would think, be like, yeah, much shorter. And now I'm looking at the notes, and it's like, oh, my goodness. So I also have an appointment, so we're going to be pushing here a little bit.
Well, we should have moved it up. It should have been the NFC South. That'll be a 12-minute show on Monday. So Houston.
I heard you're doing that with Billy.
I mean,
is that rumor true?
That would be news to me. I mean, I have to
I think it'd be news to him too.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I have to look at some of my contractual details and see exactly what Mondays you've requested off for season 37 of Bet the Board.
We'll get into contractual details later. You probably won't enjoy those, but here we are.
All right, Houston Texans win total 9.5. Heavily shaded to the over. They are a prohibitive favorite to make the postseason in the second year of the C.J. Stroud experience. And as a result of all of those things, Payne, they find themselves division favorites, trying to replicate what they put together last year with a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach. We look at the offensive additions this offseason: Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, trade for Ben Skoranek defensively. They appear to be going all in as well. Danielle Hunter on a 2-year deal. Azeez Al-Shaair reunited with his defensive coordinator of San Francisco. DeMeco Autry, albeit he won't be with the team for the first 6 games, but a lot of reason to be excited. When you look at the Houston Texans, 11 wins last season matched the 11 wins they'd accumulated in the previous 3 campaigns. 5th team in the last 45 seasons to make the playoffs with preseason Super Bowl odds of 200-1 or larger. It was the largest win improvement at +7 from the 2022 to 2023 season. First team in NFL history to win the division with a rookie quarterback and a head coach combination. 3rd team since 1950 to win a playoff game with a rookie quarterback and a head coach. I mean, the list goes on and on. But Payne, as we know in the league, since we love parity in the NFL, the schedule gets significantly more difficult for the Texans. So they will have their hands full. But Bobby Slowick went out there, gave C.J. Stroud a blueprint that he was able to execute, and it was the Houston Texans, behind the strength of the 2nd overall pick in the draft, that were able to lead an offensive resurgence that took them to the top of the division 1 season ago.
You know, similar to, I think, a lot of the teams we discussed last show in the NFC North, the Texans kind of fit that bill of being difficult to gauge because we know they're improved, but the market also understands that, and so you know, you're figuring out if the price correction of 3 games in the win total market year over year is accurate. I think that's a little tougher to do when you have a key player at the most important position at a point his career that can ascend so far past the projection. And so it's interesting because if C.J. Stroud doesn't ascend to a new level, then you kind of become a Kool-Aid drinker with egg on your face backing Houston. And if Stroud does, then the 3-game market adjustment upward probably isn't close to enough. We can get to Stroud here in a minute. I think Bobby Slowick is probably the larger factor here in the calculus. If you go back to our Texans preview last season, I was like, boy, I know it's only preseason, but I don't like this offense. And it really just looked like a watered-down version of the 49ers without the premium talent. And then you go in season, and some weeks Slowick looks like a genius. Other weeks you're wondering if that's the same human. And you kind of go even to the end of the season, right? That dichotomy was on display at the very end. Like, what on earth was Bobby Slowick doing against the Colts in Week 18? Arguably one of the worst game plans and called games of any coordinator last season. And then it's Wild Card Weekend against the Browns, and it's the complete inverse. Like, one of the best game plans, some of the best play calls a coordinator made the entire season. I think as a whole, you see Bobby Slowick trying to mimic Kyle Shanahan maybe too much, and I'm all for implementing like great things your mentors teach you, but you have to be your own man too. And so you're looking at Slowick. He had the 6th lowest pass rate in the first half of games last year. It was 48% run in the first half. And the problem is you're not adjusting to what the defenses are calling, right? Houston saw the 5th highest rate of loaded boxes. So Slowick's effectively running incessantly into like a high rate of loaded boxes, and no surprise, the efficiency was horrific. 29% success rate on first half runs on early downs. And so, you have this rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud that's now forced to throw into these obvious long down situations. And then the problem gets magnified because Stroud's playing behind this beat up offensive line. The Texans offensive line most injured of any NFL team in the history of our tracking data last year. You had 10 different linemen play at least 208 snaps last season. It was like you're watching the greatest game of musical chairs ever, right? And it was thought to be, I don't know if it was a strength, but it was certainly thought to be a good offensive line. It was the most expensive offensive line in the entire league on paper. And then you take that predictability another step. Like when it's 3rd and 7, the play call is rarely ever going to win because of disguise, right? At that point, your pass catchers need to win one-on-one on predictable down and distances, but the Texans had the 5th most injured receiver room last season. And so I look at these glaring issues, right? There's 3 of them. Slowick being predictable, O-line devastated by injuries, receiver room was beat up. And C.J. Stroud comes out the other side. He shows elite traits. The metrics back it up. When Slowick actually let Stroud pass in early downs the first 3 quarters, 6th out of 40 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. When Stroud was kept clean, the big-time throw rate was nearly 2.5x the turnover-worthy play rate. He was willing to push the ball downfield. Nearly 39% of throws traveled plus 10 yards, right? And then you look at the highest passer rating on throws, 20-plus yards. 1 turnover-worthy throw on 65 deep passes. So you effectively have this offense, right? It's taking shots without risk, right? I think that's probably the position any human in life wants, right? Like it was awesome. And so I think if Bobby Slowick is better in 2024, and there's no reason, the guy's young, he should be able to improve, and you have all of this data that you could spend the offseason with and figure out different things within your offense and get it to take off. Houston also plays a below-average schedule of passing defenses. I think we understand that at this point C.J. Stroud's a worker, so you're expecting him to get a little bit better. Offensive line should be better with just health, and internally there's a belief all 5 starters will be ready for Week 1 against the Colts. Now, some of those guys probably need to be better even when healthy. You have Tunzel, one of the best pass-blocking tackles in the league. Shaq Mason is a fine right guard. God, if you can get him back to like the 2016 to 2021 level, that'd be huge. But the kids around those 2 guys need to step up. You have Kenyon Green, Juice Scruggs, Titus Howard, Blake Fisher. Those 4 guys have an average draft position of 39th overall. So there's premium draft capital spent on those 4. They need to step it up. And then you just kind of look at the delta that Stroud had. No pressure, 2nd in EPA. Pressured, 27th. So improved O-line play would be huge here. You also have a GM that understands the assignment, right? It's win now with Stroud on his rookie deal. The weapons look great. You drafted Tank Dell last season. You were higher on him than anybody I know. 2.2 yards per route run as a rookie. Signed Dalton Schultz. He was a fringe top 10 tight end, and a lot of key metrics. Nico Collins made the massive year 3 leap with competent quarterback play, and he's a guy we've been high on. You could see, right, his individual improvement, even though the Texans' QB situations were horrific the prior 2 seasons. But you just look at him, right? He's 6'4", 215. Nico's like your traditional outside X receiver, 3.1 yards per route run. That was number 2 among qualifying receivers. And then Stephon Diggs gets added. And, Todd, we discussed Diggs during the offseason show, and I said it's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Right? It's a win for Buffalo. It's a win for the Texans. It's a win for Diggs. And from the people I've spoken to in Houston, physically, Diggs has plenty of juice left. And I know what the metrics indicated down the stretch, but him and Josh Allen were having problems on and off the field.
Choose your words wisely.
There was a change in coordinator and play calling. And then you look, 9 of the final 11 Bills games were played in environments that didn't have picture-perfect weather conditions. Apparently, Stroud and Diggs are in lockstep with one another. Diggs is really happy. He's taken on a leadership role on and off the field to the point where it looks like DeMeco Ryans is going to name Diggs team captain. So it's extremely difficult not to buy the Texans offense, right, this season, because the O-line should improve, especially with health. Bobby Slowick probably has the ability to be better because you see it in flashes in certain games, just needs more consistency. And then you'd expect C.J. Stroud to take another step, Diggs to get back into form, and now that he's healthy. But you look at the schedule, and the Texans have to stack some wins early. That's certainly the softest part of the schedule, but it just becomes difficult, right? Because there's a lot of hype here. But certainly, as you truly dig into this, there's true reasons for that hype.
Hell, C.J. Stroud made Noah Brown look like a first-ballot Hall of Famer with some of the performances we saw in games where Nico Collins missed. So I think the quarterback has turned the weapons into a luxury at his disposal, and now he's got guys with a pedigree. Defensively, though, Payne, when we look at the Texans, the schedule last year kind of propped them up a little bit. They didn't exactly play the most grueling schedule of opposing quarterbacks by any stretch of the imagination. We look at what they were able to do in terms of stopping the run. They were stout in that particular department, have an emerging superstar, Will Anderson, that they can now pair with an elite rush end in Danielle Hunter, who signed to a 2-year deal coming over from Minnesota. And the secondary, though, they took a couple of flyers on players that had the draft pedigree at C.J. Henderson and Jeff Okudah, but this was a group that really had some issues when the front seven failed to generate pressure. We could talk all we want about the offensive capabilities for the Texans, but where do you feel this defense slots, and is there room for them to improve as well under the leadership of DeMeco Ryans?
Absolutely, right? That's just very easy to say. And then you have a GM who also spent on defense, right? Went out and got Danielle Hunter at end. For me, you look at him the last 3 seasons when he's played at least 400 snaps, Hunter's averaged 84 pressures in 16 sacks, and he's going to help take away some of the focus from Will Anderson, who saw double teams at a 23% rate last year. That was actually the 5th most among the top 20 edge rushers in pass rush win rate. So, a metric Will Anderson also finished 3rd in. Derek Barnett, right, had the career resurgence, being the 3rd guy in Houston's edge rotation after that trade. Had his best season from an efficiency standpoint, and then they re-signed the old guy, Jerry Hughes, who just is a situational pass rusher. Recorded a QB hurry on nearly 10% of pass rush snaps. The run defense you mentioned was elite last year. Houston finished number 2 in rushing yards allowed before first contact, but the interior of the line is completely rebuilt. DeMeco Autry comes over from Tennessee, Fadukasi from Jacksonville, Tim Settle from Buffalo, Mario Edwards from Seattle. Autry, he's a menace, getting pressure from inside, double-digit sacks in 4 of his last 6 seasons, 12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps the last 3 seasons. You mentioned the 6-game suspension, so that's gonna suck. If you get Foley, regaining his 2020 form. That'd be huge. Struggled in Jacksonville for large stretches. Similar story with Tim Settle. If he can regain his Washington form from 2021, this interior looks really good. And then Mario Edwards is atop the depth chart with the Autry suspension, plus player on average over his 9-year career. And then Khalil Davis resigns in Houston after a career year, so a nice depth piece there. Linebacker gets the big upgrade with Aziz joining DeMeco Ryans after a year apart. They spent 4 years together in San Francisco. 2022, that final year for the 49ers was Aziz's best season, right? He's just fantastic against the run. 7% missed tackle rate in 2022. His only season in Tennessee was last year. He had a 26% of the Titans' tackles on rushing snaps. So that was a huge addition for Houston. Christian Harris enters year 3, Bama kid, played with Nick Saban, it made a huge leap last year under DeMeco. One of the largest increases year over year in efficiency against the pass for a linebacker. Only allowed 6.5 yards per target. Past those two, though, I think there's some questions, right? You have Henry To'oTo'o, had a horrific rookie season, but you look at DeMeco Ryans, a former linebacker. It's his specialty. I automatically give him the benefit of the doubt with this room, and it wouldn't shock me if there became a player we're not talking about that has an anomaly Blake Cashman type season. The defense struggled last year through the air, right? I think they've upgraded the secondary a little bit. I think the drastic change in scheme and verbiage probably will be better understood and communicated between guys this season. But all told, Houston finished 23rd in schedule-adjusted pass defense last year. Bottom 5 in explosive pass rate allowed. And then there's a massive uptick coming in schedule strength. The Texans faced the easiest schedule of pass offenses last season. It's projected to be top 10 this year. So I think the goal, kind of what you asked me overarching, is if you can get to below average, knowing the schedule's tougher, right? Improve while the schedule gets significantly tougher. I think, it helps having a pass rush trio of Anderson, Hunter, and Autry once he returns from suspension. The pieces in the back, though, have talent. That's what's interesting about this, right? I mean, Derek Stingley actually looked like the 3rd overall pick last year.
Yeah, he's starting to look like the elite cover corner they expected him to be when they took him with that surprising top 5 pick.
Yeah, 54% of targets were caught against him. He forced an incompletion on 21% of targets. That was the 6th best rate among 132 qualifiers. Finished 5th best coverage grade overall. And then you have Desmond King, who is fantastic in the slot. Jimmy Ward has produced 5 straight seasons of great ball. He comes over from the 49ers. His availability, though, is kind of the greatest question at this point. He's often injured. He's 33. He's dealing with a hamstring injury right now. Jalen Petrie needs a big year 3. Improved slightly year over year. He's kind of been a replacement level guy to this point. And then there's lots of high pedigree guys that'll either emerge or become solid depth, right? Then you have Kamari Lassiter, who was drafted in round 2, tested poorly, so he dropped, but I think he's a perfect fit in DeMeco's zone scheme. Kalen Bullock, a 3rd-round pick out of USC. He was the Trojans' best pass defender for multiple seasons. He's an elite cover guy at the college level. And then those high pedigree guys that are going to have a chance are C.J. Henderson and Jeff Okudah, both first-round picks. They look like depth pieces right now, which I think is fine in that role. But, for me, when I look at this, the Texans' defense upgraded its pieces. You're in year 2 of Ryan's scheme. I think, again, the goal in totality is to show some level of improvement despite the difficulty increasing year over year at the largest rate in the league.
I mean, this is a team that, to your point, knows that they have a talented quarterback on a rookie deal, have pushed their chips to the middle of the table, and are going to hope to build on last year, where they played a tremendous game against the Cleveland Browns to kick off the postseason, followed it up with a good first half against the Baltimore Ravens, and just were unable to try and take advantage. So we'll see if they can go one step closer to a conference championship game, and maybe have an outside shot to represent the AFC, playing for the Lombardi Trophy down there in New Orleans. We have seen C.J. Stroud take considerable attention in the MVP market. It's always interesting to see him mentioned amongst the elite quarterbacks with a slightly more proven track record. From Houston to Indianapolis, and the Colts' Payne were arguably the second biggest surprise in this division a season ago. Their win total, 8.5 flat, depending on where you look. They are underdogs to make the playoffs as things stand right now. third favorites in the division, a price tag north of 3-1. And the biggest thing for Shane Steichen's bunch is trying to keep their starting quarterback, Anthony Richardson, available and healthy, knowing how dynamic he can be as a runner and a thrower. Steichen deserves the utmost respect for trying to salvage the season with Gardner Minshew last year. I mean, this was a team, when you looked up and down the roster, you wondered how they had a chance to play themselves into the postseason, and were one quarter away from being able to do so, either as division champs or as a wild card. But the Colts did lose 3 of their final 5 games last year, including that Week 18 win and in-loss versus Houston. They were tied for 10th in points per game under their first-year head coach after finishing 30th back in 2022. Team was a little bit fortunate, but overachieved based on the roster composition. They were stout when it came to protecting leads. 8-0 when leading at the half, 1-7 when they needed to play from behind, and you can understand that when you're limited by some of Gardner Minshew's attributes. This was a team, though, that lived and died under Jim Bob Cooter's offensive coordinator with the RPO and Payne. Anthony Richardson says he's healthy, says he's excited to get back out there. We need to see more accuracy from him, but we know those legs are electric, and paired with Jonathan Taylor can give the Colts a unique wrinkle that opposing defensive coordinators are going to be forced to contend with.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Colts fan, I think you have to be excited about what the offense can be. In 2022, Indy finished dead last in offensive efficiency, and they were extremely healthy. And you fast forward to last season, and the Colts finished 13th in scheduled adjusted efficiency, despite being bottom third of the league in adjusted games lost at offensive line, running back, and tight end. And as you mentioned, Anthony Richardson only played 4 games. So to us, this wasn't surprising. I mean, we knew what Shane Steichen was. He's excellent. We kind of expected that. It was unfortunate in that you don't want to be repetitive, so it wasn't on the AFC South preview last year, but our NFC East preview talked about Shane Steichen at great length, and the timelines and the data points were so glaring that, the Eagles' offensive success all pointed to Shane Steichen being fully responsible, and we outlined specifically that weeks 8 of that 2021 season, Shane Steichen took over the Eagles' offense. From that point forward, Philly was 6th in EPA per play. First 7 weeks that year with Sirianni calling plays, 22nd. And then in 2022, Philly obviously made that massive leap, finished 3rd in schedule-adjusted efficiency on offense, and then went on to the Super Bowl. Now everyone's talking about Steichen because it's easier to identify, right? Colts offense looked competent. Eagles fell off a cliff. I think the other thing that we talked about that went unnoticed was Shane Steichen making an outside-the-box hire with Cameron Turner to be the Colts QB coach. And Turner had spent time in Carolina working with Cam Newton. He spent time in Arizona working with Kyler Murray, and I thought that was a great hire. And I caught a clip of Turner on a podcast earlier this offseason where he was heaping praise on Anthony Richardson's work ethic, which is something we knew was high level. But he nicely was still talking about steps in Richardson's maturation. And Turner said it's about understanding Steichen's offense so Richardson can play faster and react quicker. And the exact quote was effectively, the next layer as far as growth comes with understanding the base rule of each play. If Richardson understands the base rule, the next step is, if you do get this from a defense, you can fast forward your eyes and skip specific reads, the little tricks that speed up the decision-making process. That was in May. And I know the sample size is just 2 rusty drives in the preseason, but Anthony Richardson looked abysmal against Denver on Sunday. And there was 3 plays that stood out. There was, pre-snap on a 2nd and 8. He couldn't identify a blitzer at this point. Actually made the correct throw post-snap, but the ball to Pittman was wildly inaccurate. There was a 3rd and 8 where Richardson should have thrown a pick. He bypassed 2 open guys underneath for Grayson past the sticks, and instead of making a throw that sat Grayson down, AR threw Grayson into traffic. And then there was a 3rd and 7, I would say, I've never seen something so bad. It was on the 2nd drive. Grayson's wide open on a drag across the field. Richardson identifies it so late. I mean, we're talking 4 or 5 seconds. And the ball's then thrown behind. So instead of an easy first down, the Colts are punting on 4th and 1.5 from the 37. The accuracy, to your point, was horrific at Florida. The passing profile coming into the league was one of the worst you'd ever seen from a rookie. And again, the sample size is just 4 games, but prior to injury, AR's completion rate was 8% below expectation, and the shoulder surgery that only had him play 4 games last year is to the throwing arm. And so until Richardson proves he can throw on time and accurately in that 5 to 15 yard area, defenses are just going to play with two high safeties and take away his best attribute, which is the arm cannon. Defenses are just going to carefully get up the field with their rush lanes, right? Because they prefer Richardson patting the ball in the pocket and throwing late as opposed to him using the legs. There is a positive, right? The potential growth is there because of schedule. The Colts are going to face bottom 5 group of pass defenses this season. The offensive line made small improvements in pass protection last year. They went from dead last by a mile to 26th in pass block win rate. Let's see if they can get close to average this season. We know Shane's going to put AR in positions to succeed. The up-tempo offense, you'd think, allows AR to feel in rhythm and get some confidence back at certain times. The weapons Anthony Richardson has around him are improved. Michael Pittman continues getting better. Last year, his first with over 2 yards per route run. You saw them just rely on Pittman. His target share increased to 29%. Unfortunately, Josh Downs is dealing with a high ankle sprain. About a 60% chance of playing week 1. That injury has a tendency to linger a bit, but we saw flashes from Downs last season. He's got this sudden quickness that's almost impossible to defend out of the slot. Finished 10th in win rate versus man coverage. He was great after the catch. 2% drop rate. So Downs is a big need. Then the Colts went out and drafted Donnie Mitchell. We know this by now, right? He's flashed basically everywhere he's been. He's flashing in camp. Some of the reporters suggest Mitchell is AR's favorite target right now. Talent and production aren't what's held Mitchell back, right? Alec Pierce provides some depth, and apparently he's had a great camp with all of the competition. Tight end room is deep. There's talks of keeping 5 guys there. It's that deep. There's a lot of buzz around Jelani Woods. Had 312 yards and 3 touchdowns as a rookie. Missed all of last year with injury, but you look at his profile, he's a guy that you would think is a security blanket for Anthony Richardson, who, again, right, doesn't have the best accuracy. So what are we doing? We're finding a guy who's 6'7" with a massive catch radius. Woods at 6'7" is 253, runs 4.6. He is a freak, ranked number 1 out of more than 1,000 tight ends since 1987 in relative athletic score. So he's a guy that potentially has the ability to come on this season. The floor for AR in the Colts offense is higher, right, because of that mobility you mentioned. The ground game has to be a factor. Jonathan Taylor is hopefully healthier this season. You remember that ankle injury kept him out or kind of diminished his role the first 7 weeks. Then he tore a thumb ligament in week 12, and still I thought Taylor had a solid season with a backup quarterback and an offensive line that wasn't great. Finished 21st in yards created among qualifying backs, 11th in success rate, 13th in yards per rush after contact. So I think if you're projecting a healthier Taylor, the Colts offensive run game should be a little bit improved. The O-line, the better aspect of that group is run blocking. So if you can get above average run block win rate, that should help. I think the challenge becomes, specific to the ground game, the Colts actually face a schedule that projects to be the toughest in the league against the run. So that's why it's like, AR's got to be able to throw the ball a little bit more this year because that run schedule is so difficult. And then you look at not just the opponent, but how the schedule lays out. And again, I understand AR has a cannon, but there's a handful of outdoor games late in the season for a dome team, right? You're in New York twice, once against the Jets, once against the Giants. You got a game in Denver, another in New England where weather could be a factor. The positive is Shane Steichen's scheme is so good. Like last year, he was top 10 basically in every meaningful rush metric, even against top 10 run defenses. So that's potentially a positive for AR's legs along with Taylor's. I just think in totality, Indy's going to be competitive again. If Richardson's ceiling gets close to realized, then the Colts are going to make a run at the division.
Need to keep him healthy out there. That becomes a big thing in his development in terms of giving them that explosive big play potential. That was often lacking with Gardner Minshew under center. It was more dink and dunk, methodical, death by a million paper cuts, so to speak. But still just 1 quarter away from potentially getting to the postseason, something that no Colts fan, I'd imagine, thought was possible going into the season. Defensively,
the problem there, though, Todd, right? And you think about this, he's not a good enough passer to not run it, right? And so he's got to get to a level where the passing becomes good enough to where maybe you take off some of the run game from his plate so he can have some form of longevity. And that'll be the ultimate battle there for Shane Steichen, who came out and said, hey, we're going to run him.
I mean, that's what you got to lean into his best skill set there. I mean, he had a similar athlete that he tried to get out to the biggest stage and did effectively with Jalen Hurts. Anthony Richardson, probably not nearly as polished a passer, obviously, but a lot of rinse and repeat type approach for Shane Steichen there. Now, Gus Bradley on the defensive side, Payne, I mean, this was a defense that left a lot to be desired, but benefited immensely from playing a lower echelon strength to schedule when it came to opposing offenses, specifically in the passing department. They did have depth up front. An NFL high 4 players finished the season with 8+ sacks. One of those players, though, already lost for the season after tearing his Achilles in Samson Ebukam earlier. But this was a team that finishes 26 in pressure rate, 5th in sacks. You have to imagine there's a little bit of regression in their future. But when you go out and you draft one of the best pass rushers in the draft from UCLA and Laitu Latu, pair him up with DeForest Buckner, you can understand the optimism that exists there. But again, still questions in that defensive backfield that need to be addressed sooner rather than later. So when we look at Gus Bradley and what he's tasked with for this Colts defense, room to improve, areas of strength, concerns, how do you grade out this particular unit?
Well, they regressed last year, and so that's back-to-back seasons of below-average efficiency for Gus Bradley's group. And what's interesting is he's 58, right, which is young in the NFL coaching world, but some aspects of his game seem to have passed him by. And I know Chris Ballard retaining Gus was a hot-button topic locally if you followed it, but Ballard made it clear why he retained Gus, and it was basically Ballard admitting he knew regression was coming, that Ballard specifically wanted to go young in that secondary and build cohesion and understood there would be some bumps in that path. And that information I got becomes really accurate because Indy didn't sign anybody to bolster the secondary again this offseason. He wants to let the kids develop. And there were opportunities to upgrade in free agency at safety, right? Diggs was out there. Justin Simmons is still out there. I think he's visiting Atlanta this week. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's where he's at.
I mean, it'd be a great addition pairing him up with Matthew Judon, who they brought in to try and bolster that defense. That's for sure.
Something we'll discuss, I believe, Monday, right? Okay, so you mentioned Juju Brents. He's the guy in the secondary that I think Indy's relying most on to make that leap. Was the second-round pick last year. You just look at him as a player, right? He's 6'3", he's got an 83-inch wingspan, so he's just long and rangy. The problem is health, right? He missed OTAs in most of camp last year with a hamstring and a wrist injury. Missed the first 2 games last season. Then he suffered a quad injury in Week 7 that kept him out until Week 15, and then he had the hamstring injury the final week of the season, and then there was an undisclosed procedure after OTAs this year. So Colts need a big year from Juju. Kenny Moore is the horse at nickel. Had a down 2022, but bounced back with his best season of his 7-year career last year. Very good run defender out of the slot, only allowed 6.7 yards per target. And then Julian Blackmon had his best coverage season at safety last year, and it's a contract year for him. So you would think potentially maybe plays to a new level. Past those 3, I think there's serious questions. Jalen Jones heads into year 2, was a 7th-round pick, so maybe positive regression hits, only gave up 5.8 yards per target, but allowed 6 touchdowns. There's a battle at safety between Nick Cross and Rodney Thomas. The vibe is Nick Cross is leading for that job right now. He actually showed signs of improvement in year 2 where Rodney Thomas did not. Depth is really concerning, though. But I think as we kind of lay this out and how you set us up, it's like the Colts defense is going to go as the front goes. DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart inside are an elite 1-2 punch. Buckner finished 5th in pass rush win rate despite facing a double team on 66% of snaps. 2nd among defensive linemen with 18 run stuffs and just a 7% missed tackle rate. And you got Grover Stewart. I mean, he is an elite run defender who can take on 2. Interesting was the Roquan Davis signing. That was like the Colts' big splash in free agency. That number felt a little high to me. And certainly Roquan is a strong dude. He's extremely versatile, right? You can set him up on the edge as a run defender on early downs. You can stick him inside on late downs. But he never really built on his good rookie season in Miami, and the Dolphins were like in need of tackle bodies and let him walk. The edge is interesting. Kwity Paye heads into year 4. He's looking for a new deal. Really solid player. Sets the edge extremely well. the pass rush numbers aren't great, and I think you were kind of hinting at some regression there, and it specifically is with Kwity Paye. 6.8% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, somehow finished with 8 sacks, which is wild for that pedestrian of a pressure number. You mentioned the blow. Samson Ebukam tore his Achilles. He graded out the Colts' best defender last season. He was 16th among edge rushers and pass rush win rate. So it's now on that rookie, Latu Letu. So he's an old rookie. Similar path as the Dolphins' Jalen Phillips, where he has that scary injury in college that most thought would end his career. One set of doctors don't clear him. One set of doctors do. You're kind of playing that risky game. Latu's stable metrics were all in the 97th percentile last year at UCLA. He's flashed all camp. He was a monster in the first preseason game, so hopefully that carries over. And you're hoping, right, at like 24 that his body's going to hold up, whereas most rookies maybe it won't. Tyquan Lewis, we'll see his snaps increase as well. He's kind of been a rotational piece, but had a monster season last year. His best as a pro, 18% pressure rate. Linebacker group is led by Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. Both are very, very good against the run. Franklin recorded a tackle on 22% of run snaps. Liability and coverage, though. 8.2 yards per target allowed. EJ Speed, very good run defender, had 16 stuffs. Missed tackle rate last year skyrocketed from 5% to 16%. Has to clean that up. Was slightly better than Franklin in coverage, but as a whole, if you look at the Colts linebackers, they struggled defending running backs out of the backfield, 30th in the NFL. The schedule of offenses the Colts face this season are below average, but it does improve from last year. So when I look at this, the Colts front has to dominate. Juju Brents has to make that leap and stay healthy. And if that happens, the Colts probably have their best defense in 3 seasons under Gus Bradley. It's just a big if. I am surprised, honestly, as I look at this, right, and just kind of think overarching. If the Colts think they're a player in the AFC South, and you have Anthony Richardson on the rookie deal, and you're looking right now as we record, Ballard has over $23 million in cap space. Why isn't Justin Simmons being added to the safety room? Why isn't a familiar scheme fit in Stephon Gilmore being added after he balled out in 2022 for the Colts? The secondary was a problem last season. It was a problem game 1 of the preseason. It's been a problem in camp. And literally, I'm reading articles before we record the show, Todd. Read the one from yesterday's scrimmage with Arizona. It's, quote, pass rush dominates Cardinals, but secondary gets annihilated. So, like, go sign someone, Ballard. Like, my God, man. Like, get someone in this cornerback room that can show a sign of life. And I think when you think about a Stephon Gilmore, a Justin Simmons, they're probably only 1-year deals, right? And so if you can get each of those guys, let's say both of them come over for an average of, I don't know, 10, 12, 13, 14 million, you still have about 10 million in cap space to play with, right? If something goes awry this season, you need to make a trade or you need to sign someone, and then they're off your books next season. So I don't get it when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, right? We just talked about the Texans splashing, understanding that they have a rookie quarterback, and it just doesn't seem like the same spend is being allocated to Anthony Richardson.
You almost wonder if this is a team that believes they want to see a full season of Anthony Richardson and they could theoretically go all in next year. But to your point, if you're making a series of 1-year commitments to players that can bolster your defense, it at least gives you a little bit more of a puncher's chance to try and go out there and get over the hump for a position you didn't expect to be in at this time last year. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, from the top 2 teams to the team that we thought was going to be the 800-pound gorilla and the alpha in this particular division for years to come, after Trevor Lawrence started to show flashes, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their win total sits at 8.5. They're a little bit of a shorter shot to make the playoffs than the Indianapolis Colts, right around 6-5 plus 120. If you believe they can win the division, they'll have their work cut out for them at a price tag north of 5-2. But this is a Jags team that lost 5 of their final 6 games after an 8-3 start last year. They were eliminated with a Week 18 loss. 9-8 in each season under head coach Doug Peterson. They were an NFL worst 4-29 though in the previous 2 seasons. finished with a winning record in back-to-back seasons for the first time since 2004-2005, but right around that 500 threshold, not enough to get it done. When we look at Jacksonville, their schedule doesn't exactly do them any favors, especially the first month of the season. They'll have their hands full as early as week 1 when they take on the Dolphins. They'll get the Bills and Texans on the road. They'll travel to Cleveland. So the key for them may become navigating through troubled waters early and being able to make some hay. But when we look at this team offensively, I mean, Trevor Lawrence signed to a big-time deal. You talk about the delta between what a quarterback can do when he's pressured versus when he's operating from a clean pocket. You know, Trevor Lawrence showed his sensitivity to that. The skill position players will look a little bit different, but there is a bell cow back in Travis Etienne, who is a little bit more of an accumulator than he was when it came to a model of efficiency behind an offensive line that left a lot to be desired. But when you assess Jacksonville offensively, Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, can they get Trevor Lawrence to raise the floor and start to flirt with the ceiling that we thought the former number 1 pick overall in the draft was capable of achieving?
It's really interesting the way you're talking about Jacksonville and how you phrased it, and just kind of seeing this offseason, the wide range of opinions among both bettors and analysts I'd consider savvy. And it's because, you know, you're looking at Doug Peterson. He's a Super Bowl winning coach. And then you have Trevor Lawrence, who is the highest rated high school recruit ever, and he's a national title winner. He's the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. And so the assumption is that combination should compete for Super Bowls. And, you know, maybe to a degree there, right? But for me, it's like, this is a 30-year-old franchise that has 10 winning seasons and 16 total playoff appearances. And prior to Peterson and Lawrence, Jacksonville had 1 winning season their prior 14 years. So it's like there's always two sides to the coin. And these guys have raised the floor of the Jags franchise. Well, you can kind of understand that they have underachieved the bar of a serious AFC contender. And so I think both are true, but you got everyone kind of, you know, completely split. No one's understanding the middle ground here that I kind of am seeing. This season feels really important for obviously those two, and some believe Peterson's lost a step. There were also large factions shocked by Trevor Lawrence's new contract, and to me, when I look at this, for a team that had obvious holes last year, Jacksonville was 8-3 through 11 games, and they were, in my estimation, on pace to be the team, those with a high bar set for them, even if it wasn't perfect, right? You couldn't beat the shorthanded Chiefs at home, and then you had 2 weeks to prepare for the 49ers. It looked like you didn't belong on the same field. So I understand, like, they didn't show well in those 2 big spots. I'm interested to see if Trevor Lawrence has grown, right? If Doug Peterson can find solutions for the obvious problems. And we can nitpick every single player, right? They're not good at this. They really struggle at that. And I think that's what you should do when you're looking for edges every single week, right? QB1 isn't good with pressure, right? His right guard is out. His left tackle's at 65%. The center's playing with a torn pec, and the opposing defense is number 1 in pressure rate. Those are the things you look for to find an edge week to week. But I think when you're assessing a player individually, you want the entire scope, right? You want the largest sample size possible. You want to incorporate the great, the good, the bad, the horrific, all of it. And you know, we'll get to Trevor's deficiencies that need improvement, but the reality is, before Trevor Lawrence was injured in Week 13 last season, he was QB8 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. He was 5th in success rate at 51%, and then you have that Week 13 high ankle sprain. There was a concussion in Week 15. There was an AC joint injury to his throwing shoulder Week 16. At the same time, the lead receiver, Christian Kirk, was out with a torn groin muscle, and starting left tackle Cam Robinson missed weeks 14, 15, and 16. So big shock, right? This is when you know, the Jacksonville Jaguars went to shit. They also faced a top 10 schedule of pass defenses. And then Trevor played behind an offensive line that was 29th in pass block win rate. The pass catching group was oddly horrific. And there's been serious chatter about Doug Peterson's route concepts being outdated. I also thought Jacksonville did a horrible job of how they used their receivers, Ridley specifically. It felt like every single receiver was just like running go routes every single time. But the receivers also did Trevor Lawrence no favors. The drops were incessant, 28 in total. It was the highest drop rate any QB dealt with the last 3 seasons. There's a metric called receiver error. It factors in everything. Trevor Lawrence lost 58 expected points added due to receiver error. The average QB last season only lost 21. So this wasn't just a Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, this wasn't just a Trevor Lawrence issue. There's a couple things that obviously have to improve, right? Jacksonville, their offensive line has to be better. Third lowest time to throw provided for their quarterbacks last year. They were also 27th in block rate. So the ground game finished 30th in efficiency. And you mentioned, that impacting Etienne. Can Robinson should help the O-line just by being available, right? Between suspension and injuries, only played 9 games. When he was out there, had his best pass blocking season. Never really provided anything in the run game. Then you had the right tackle, Anton Harrison. You could go back to our preview last year. He wasn't ready. He needed needed a season in the weight room. He was kind of unfairly thrown into the fire as a rookie. Jacksonville was just so desperate, though. As a pass blocker, if you just kind of parse out game by game, Harrison came on late last season. He allowed 1 pressure the final three games, 0 sacks the final 9. So hopefully he can take that next step. Brandon Scherff had a bounce-back season, but Jacksonville, can really make a step forward up front if Scherff gets back to his Washington form. They went out, they signed the veteran Mitch Morse at center. He's not in his prime, but he's coming off his 3rd best season as a pass blocker at age 32. He's a huge upgrade over Luke Fortner, who is unplayable. Ezra Cleveland is, I believe, slated to start at left guard right now. He's better as a run blocker than pass protector. He improved each of his 4 seasons in Minnesota. The Jaguars went and made that in-season trade, and boy, he struggled mightily in the 7 games with Jacksonville after that trade. But if you get him to his Vikings form there towards the end, it's a massive upgrade. We have to kind of keep our eyes there. He's dealing with a heel injury, so monitor that situation. But I think why it's important to be really thorough with the Jags offensive line is what you hit at the very top, right? It's an area Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson haven't figured out. Doug hasn't figured ways to counter pressure. Every receiver just can't run go routes, and Trevor has to be a quicker processor and also toughen up under pressure, right? His clean versus pressure delta is massive relative to other quarterbacks. 37th out of 43 quarterbacks in adjusted accuracy when pressured. 37th in turnover-worthy play rate under pressure. EPA and success rates all outside the top 30 when pressured for Trevor Lawrence. The turnovers have to be fixed. We kind of made a joke last year about being blonde, right? 24 fumbles the last 2 seasons. 16 have been lost. 22 interceptions the last 2 seasons. The timing of these interceptions absolutely suck, and we know this all too well in some of our survivors there, Todd.
Yes, we're not playing the Jags against the Texans anytime going forward, thankfully.
So, there's just a collection of horrific decisions and high-leverage moments, and I don't know why I did this, but I kind of got bored, and I was like, let's see where these 22 picks are. 7 of the 22 are just inexcusable. If you look the last 2 seasons, Trevor Lawrence has been picked on 1st and goal from the 6, 3rd and 1 from the 31, right? That's 4-down territory if you just throw it away because you're going for it on 4th and 1, or you're kicking a field goal if it's a certain situation. 1st and 10 from the 24, 2nd and 7 from the 16, 2nd and 1 from the 7, 1st and goal from the 1. These are all downs where you live to fight another day. There's zero reason to force a football in any of those situations and come away with exactly 0 points on those 7 drives. But that's 7 of those 22 picks. It's just, it's nuts. The weapons are new. And, through this portion of camp, Jacksonville's rolling with the rookie Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis in 2 receiver sets. If Brian Thomas is as good as advertised, Jacksonville's offense hits a new ceiling. Good camp so far, flashed in the preseason game with the explosive down the sideline. In saying that, Thomas was kind of a one-year wonder at LSU. And in that year, he had Malik Neighbors drawing attention. He had a Heisman winner throwing to him. The vast majority of Brian Thomas's production came against the weakest opponents. Christian Kirk comes onto the field in 3 wide receiver sets. I would think you want him out there a little bit more. I'm not sure what Gabe Davis is. All 4 seasons of his career are above replacement level, but it's with Josh Allen. Last season, Davis was 126th in route win rate and finished with 1.3 yards per route run. On the other hand, right, Christian Kirk, 2.1 yards per route run and finished 7th in route win rate against man coverage. It was Kirk's best season as a pro with down QB play. So Doug's got to get that figured out pretty quickly. Evan Ingram had basically a career resurgence, you'd say, in Jacksonville. Needs the drops and fumbles to subside. NTN provides great receiving value out of the backfield, one of the best in that department. He probably should be more involved to combat pressure. The value as a runner I don't think is fully realized because of the offensive line play. His first contact point last season was 0.8 yards. And then you're heading into this season. Jacksonville projects to face a top 3 schedule of run defenses. Somehow he was an elite fantasy back last year despite all of some of these issues. But, for me, kind of put a bow tie in this. Peterson's got to figure out through scheme and play design how to best combat the pressure. You got to freshen up the route trees and, have a better understanding of where his receivers are most comfortable winning. Last year, it wasn't with Ridley trying to win outside on go routes. He's far better positioned as a slot receiver at this point. And then the next step is, Trevor being better against pressure, limiting the head-scratching errors. And it sounds simple, but it's so clearly obvious Jacksonville can only reach that high bar of being a true AFC contender if these obvious things improve.
Well, if the offense improves like we expect it could, the question becomes, will the defense make its improvement as well? Ryan Nielsen comes in as defensive coordinator, taking over for Mike Caldwell. When you look at what Nielsen did in his first season as defensive coordinator in Atlanta, improved that Falcons stop unit from 27th in the league to 11th in total defense and helped them double their sack total from the previous season, jumping from 21 to 42. The Jaguars made a renewed commitment to Josh Allen, making him one of the higher paid defensive ends in the entire league and defensive players overall. Franchise record, 17.5 sacks last season, had him tied for second most in the league. Highest percentage of team sacks, 44% of them in the NFL last season. 17.5 of the Jags' 40. Travon Walker, a former number 1 pick as well, started to show that the light bulb may have gone on there. 10 sacks and nearly a 13% pressure rate in his sophomore season. But this is still a Jags stop unit that has more questions than answers, in my opinion, because if they don't generate a pass rush, Payne, I don't want to say it's a broken record, but we're plagued with some of the same concerns we saw with the Colts, a secondary that left a lot to be desired.
What's interesting for me is I thought the Jags defense made strides last year, and I went back and listened, and we projected the defense to be improved, and all told, Jacksonville finished 10th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, and apparently Doug needed a scapegoat, so he fired Mike Caldwell and a couple other defensive staff members, and you mentioned Ryan Nielsen as the Jaguars' new DC. He's from the Dennis Allen coaching tree. He spent last year in Atlanta, and again, in totality, he might have improved a couple areas, but the Falcons finished 24th in defensive efficiency. So I don't know necessarily what to expect. I think from a scheme perspective, if he brings the same style with him from Atlanta to Jacksonville, it's going to be an attacking front that probably changes far too often. We saw 4-3, we saw 3-4, we saw some 3-3-5 mixed in. Again, probably too much to absorb and expect guys to play fast and free. I would expect a lot of man coverage. I would think Jacksonville sees one of the highest rates of change in coverage. The Falcons used the 3rd highest rate of man last year, which is, again, a complete 180. The Jaguars last season used the 3rd highest rate of zone. And that makes me a little nervous because on paper, I don't necessarily see the horses in Jacksonville's secondary to play that much man coverage. Maybe the positive is the schedule of pass offenses ticks down this season. It was top 5 last year, projected to be just average this season. But I don't love the corner situation for Jacksonville. Tyson Campbell just got paid. He's had 1 great season in coverage, 2 below replacement level. Last year, Tyson surrendered 8.2 yards per target and a 127 passer rating. Hopefully better health has him back in that 2022 form. This will be Ronald Darby's 6th team in 10 seasons. Metrically, he's better than how the market treats him. Darby, 5.4 yards per target allowed for Baltimore last season and a 49% catch rate, but he didn't have played about 400 snaps. Jerrion Jones had his career revitalized under Mike Norvell at Florida State, became a slot corner and was dominant in that role. I know his length and athleticism can trick coordinators into wanting, Jones to play outside, but trust me, slot only. Andre Sisco, solid safety, 3 straight seasons of above replacement level play. Antonio Johnson was a 5th round pick out of A&M, showed flashes in limited snaps last year. If Johnson continues to play that over starter snaps, then the concerns are a little less. Darnell Savage signed as a veteran presence. He can play safety or in the slot. He's had one really good year. It was in 2020. The last 3 seasons, Savage has been below replacement level. The front of the defense has high-end pieces, but I'm interested to see the depth. Josh Allen, we know, is a freak. 18% pressure on pass rush snaps, sets the edge extremely well. Trayvon Walker showed signs of life. His pressure rate increased about 4% year over year, but still struggles to set the edge, and his missed tackle rate was 27%. I'd also highly advise to stop dropping Walker into coverage. You have Eric Armstead. He was the big free agent signing inside 10th in pass rush win rate among interior linemen. His ability as a run defender was elite from 2018 to 2020, but he's dealt with, a reoccurring foot injury and a reoccurring knee issue the past few seasons, and so his run production hasn't been as good. I think the front needs Devon Hamilton to get back to his 2022 form. Kind of been dealing with a lingering back injury last season and was unplayable. Robertson Harris is a solid veteran piece, but I don't see much quality depth here. The linebacker group is damn good, right? Devin Lloyd played to the level we grew accustomed to at Utah. His rookie season, he was horrific, but we saw improvements year 2 in his missed tackle rate. His yards allowed per target cut down by 1.5 yards. Lloyd graded out the 4th best linebacker against the run among 89 qualifying linebackers. And then you have Olekin, continues to be a tackling machine. 407 tackles the last 3 seasons, only a 9% missed tackle rate over that stretch. It was his best season in coverage as well. So maybe that duo helps clean up some of the issues up front. But all told, Jaguars face a below-average schedule of offenses this season. I think that should help. But the beginning portion of the schedule is brutal, especially when you're completely morphing your defensive scheme. You got the Dolphins, Browns, Bills, and Texans out of the chute. That's nuts. Easily the toughest schedule of offenses faced the first 4 weeks for any defense in the league. Now, Jacksonville doesn't have the best home field advantage, but they only play 6 true home games, which isn't helpful, especially earlier in the season when you can use that heat and humidity to your advantage. I would be very surprised if Jacksonville matches their top 10 defensive efficiency rating from last season, Todd.
Team's going to have their hands full. I think a lot of people hoping that the Jags can return to some level of prominence, can compete for that AFC South crown. But to your point, if they don't get off to a quick start or at least finish the month of September at 500 because the defense goes through some growing pains, it could be very interesting if they're unable to stay afloat until the schedule lightens up on the back end. Last but not least, in the AFC South, Payne, it's the Tennessee Titans, and this team is going to look significantly different. Their win total, 6.5, shaded to the under, more than 3-1 the going rate for them to try and get into the postseason, and upwards of 10-1 available on them to be the Cinderella story and come from off the pace to win the division. Brian Callahan takes over for Mike Vrabel, one of 7 new head coaches in the league. As far as some of the additions, they're household names, but how well they'll gel in Nashville remains to be seen. Calvin Ridley on the offensive side, L'Jarius Sneed via trade, Jamal Adams, Tyler Boyd coming over, given his familiarity with Coach Callahan's offense, Chidobe Awuzie to bolster the secondary, Lloyd Cushenberry along that offensive line, Kenneth Murray, Mason Rudolph to take on a backup role. Gone are Titans fixtures in Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, the aforementioned DeMeco Autry, Azeez Al-Shaair from the linebacking core. And this is a franchise, Payne, that's gone 6-18 over the last 24 games. It's tied for the second worst record in the NFL over that span. They've had the 29th ranked scoring offense and 30th ranked passing offense over the last 2 seasons. This is a group that could find themselves underdogs in damn near every game, the lone exception coming against the Patriots. And when you begin to try and identify if the Titans can take a step forward, a change in blood at head coach can go a long way. But will Will Levis be the guy that can create this full-on aerial assault and allow the Titans to at least get close to average when it comes to some level of competency on the offensive side?
Well, I mean, a complete 180 shift in philosophy from defense with Vrabel to offense with Brian Callahan is coming. And we know Brian Callahan comes over from Cincinnati. I think the bar to exceed offensive expectation, at least initially, is really low, right? I mean, Todd Downing and Tim Kelly were
horrific.
Yeah, I mean, the Titans finished 25th in schedule-adjusted efficiency last season. 22nd was their average over the last 3 seasons. There's real optimism for Brian Callahan. He was hired by Sean McVay in 2017. He was under that umbrella for 2 years before following Zach Taylor to Cincinnati. But, let's not forget Brian didn't call plays in Cincinnati any of those 5 years. It took about 5 years for us to come around on Zach Taylor as a plus offensive mind and play caller, and it wasn't until we saw what he did with Jake Browning last season. So, Brian is saying all of the right things in terms of offensive philosophy, his approach as a teacher, his demeanor as a coach, all of the buzzwords we love hearing. I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on crowning him an offensive wizard just yet, but I think that everything that he's at least pitching sounds like a massive upgrade, sounds like Tennessee is going to enter the year 2024. What we know for certain is Brian seems to be more Zach Taylor than Sean McVay. The Bengals finished second in pass rate over expectation last season. The Rams were 21st. Relative to the Titans' offense last year, this could be the offense with the largest shift to passing. And Callahan's philosophy is quite literally passing and winning outside. It's a direct quote. So I think Will Levis, who you mentioned, probably the perfect place to start. The arm talent is undeniable. The big frame, he's got big hands, he's athletic enough. Factoring in his really poor environment and situation last year, I thought Levis performed better than any of my expectations for him coming out of college. And when the Titans actually let Will Levis throw on first down the first 3 quarters, he finished 10th out of 35 qualifiers in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. He was first in air yards, so he was attacking downfield. Levis had a 6% big-time throw rate, which was 5th best among QBs with at least 100 dropbacks. The situation Levis was in, not great. Too many runs into loaded boxes on first down, and Levis was basically being left in second and long situations. The yards to go on second down for Levis was the 26th most. That's just not how you want to help a rookie quarterback, despite the idea. It's like, hey, we're going to get Derrick Henry involved and take the load off of Will Levis. It's just such an outdated approach. What's interesting for me is if you parse out the Levis data by down and compare it to other rookie quarterbacks last year and in the prior 5 years. When Levis passed on first down, a down where a defense is on its heels because they don't know what's coming, Levis was so many deviations better than other rookie quarterbacks last season and on average the last 5 seasons. Second down, Levis was in line despite a greater than average distance to go. Third down, when the entire world knew Levis was passing because of distance, he struggled mightily. He was worse than the average rookie QB. I look at the last 3 seasons in Cincinnati where Brian is helping Zach Taylor devise game plans. The Bengals threw on early downs in the first half at a 63% rate. The sample size is small, but again, that's when Levis showed his highest level of competency as a rookie. The reports coming from Titans camp is that Will Levis has progressed and made strides. To what extent? We're going to see when the Bullets are live. Hopefully the processing is faster in year 2, but it does help. We're going to project the schedule of passing defenses that Levis faces to be bottom 5 in the NFL. The pass catchers on paper, have really improved. It's a group with variance, but the names are pretty big, right? DeAndre Hopkins, he was the only threat last season. Everyone's just waiting for him to eventually fade away. He finished 18th in yards per route run. He still proved he could win one-on-one outside. He became a great security blanket for Levis. 29% target share. Hopkins, 42% of the Titans' air yards. It was the second most of any receiver in the NFL. You had the splash signing of Calvin Ridley. Boy, his agent deserves about 45% of that deal. Ridley has not been dominant since 2020. Last season, Ridley only won on 45% of his routes, which was good for 59th. He had a drop rate approaching 9%. He was 49th out of 102 qualifiers in yards per route run. Ridley is certainly an upgrade over what Tennessee had last season, but he's going to be 30. I am interested to see where Brian lines Ridley up. If you're going to line him up in the slot, right, he's going to exceed all expectations in terms of market pricing. And we saw in the preseason, again, it's just preseason, but line him up in the slot, drag across the field, right? It's a 20-plus yard explosive play. There's a familiar face from Cincinnati coming over with Brian. It's Tyler Boyd. He can only play in the slot, and his production dropped off a cliff last season. He's going to be 30. So how is that battle going to get figured out? I think internally, right, the first move is Boyd in the slot with Hopkins and Ridley lined up outside. We'll see how that goes. There are some depth guys, right? Treylon Burks is still around. Westbrook-Akina is still around. And then, Jaquan Jackson has flashed some out of Tulane. I think what's protecting Will Levis has hopefully improved in both talent and health. Levis was pressured on 45% of his dropbacks as a rookie. As a whole, the Titans allowed a pressure rate over 41%, which was second worst in the league. And Levis was slightly above average in his time to throw, 20th quickest out of 45 qualifiers. So it's not like he held on to the ball forever and hindered the offensive line. Based on what we saw in Cincinnati, I expect Levis to be in shotgun more. We saw that offense continue to improve when the quarterback was healthy enough, despite the offensive line being horrific the last 4 seasons, finishing 27th or worst in pass block win rate. But I think that'll help Levis, right? Being able to process quicker pre and post snap in the shotgun probably should assist the offensive line a little bit more. From a personnel standpoint, J.C. Latham was drafted 7th overall. He's making the shift to left tackle. Pass protection is going to be something to monitor there. He's come out and said, hey, I'm still working on my hands. 11th overall pick, Peter Skoronski is going to play beside Latham at left guard. He was a replacement level rookie being thrown into the fire, so you'd expect year 2 improvement there. Lloyd Cushenberry was another big free agent signing up front, 3rd-round pick out of LSU. He's coming off his best season in Denver last year. And then, for me, again, I'm not at camp, but Sadiq Charles suddenly retired last week at age 25. He was penciled in as the Titans' starting right guard. Guys are covering the team and saying, boy, this is going to be a massive loss. I just see the data, right? Nearly 1,200 snaps in 4 years of below replacement level play. The last 2 seasons have been almost unplayable. This doesn't feel like as big of an issue. Dylan Rudneeds is really had disappointing 21 and 22 seasons. Played nearly 800 snaps last year of competent football. He was a damn good run blocker in 2023. Actually showed some flashes in 2022 as a pass protector. So it looks like his job now at right guard. Nicholas Petit-Frere at right tackle. Only played 3 games last season after suffering a shoulder injury. I think the goal for Nick is to get to replacement level. Where the excitement for improvement comes up front is actually in the coaching room. Brian Callahan hired his dad, Bill, to be the offensive line coach. Bill is one of the most respected offensive line minds in the entire NFL. I'm interested to see both Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears running behind that Titans O-line. I envision far less loaded boxes for Titan running backs this season. Tony Pollard is a kid from Memphis. He's returning home. It was $10 million guaranteed. I think Tennessee is attempting to buy Pollard's floor, hoping another year removed from that horrific leg injury suffered late in 2022, that he's now 100% healthy. I expect a pretty split backfield. Tajay Spears, we love him, right? Wildly underrated, 4th in elusiveness among running backs with at least 100 attempts last season, 13th in yards created. When I look at this, the weapons are actually pretty good. Like just gauging them, on a 1-year basis, 2024. There's veteran talent that I think is hoping to eke out another season of good play. There's young talent hoping to kind of develop a year earlier than expected. There's an upgrade in philosophy. There's lots of variance that comes with this, but I'm expecting an improved Titans offense here, Todd.
Look, it's a group, to your point, that can check a lot of those boxes if they're able to try and provide much better down-to-down stuff in terms of their play calling, what their offensive line can provide, and see Will Levis take the next step. I think the one thing that you brought up that's fascinating, talking about how Will Levis performed down-to-down and first and second, showed signs and flashes, but when you're in known passing situations consistently behind the down and distance, it puts you between a rock and a hard place on third and eternity, knowing that DeAndre Hopkins was the only weapon that they could really go to somewhere down the field. Now, defensively for the Tennessee Titans, it's Denard Wilson that comes in, formerly as the Ravens defensive back coach, as defensive coordinator, hoping to replicate a little bit of what we saw from this Titans defense last year in terms of how they performed in tight spaces. Number 1 in the red zone defense in the league last year, allowed touchdowns in just 37.7% of red zone drives. Payne, this team was good up front, pretty good against the run, but you can have those gaudy numbers in terms of defending in the red zone. A lot of teams didn't have to get in the red zone. They were able to pick apart this secondary and score from distance. So what do the Titans do? They go out and they bring in some familiar names, a defensive back that we are extremely high on in L'Jarius Sneed, but a couple other players that they're going to need to return to a baseline and or figure things out, because this secondary on paper has nowhere to go but up. But if they can't make market improvement, it doesn't matter what kind of production they get up front from Jeffrey Simmons and company. This will be a stop unit that continues to flounder.
Denard Wilson is an interesting name, right? I mean, he spent 12 years in the NFL. He actually got his start under Jeff Fisher, and then he was in New York with Todd Bowles. In the last 3 seasons, he spent between Philly and Baltimore. So it's a strong defensive pedigree. And Wilson's come out and said basically his inspirations are Todd Bowles and Greg Williams, and there's players around the league that speak highly of Denard Wilson. So we'll see what it means from a game planning, play calling, and adjustment perspective. But when I look at the philosophy, it's very clear Wilson wants to attack and be aggressive, right? Play downhill. And one of his pressers this offseason, I don't know if you saw this, but Wilson actually quoted General George Patton's famous line of, "Nobody ever defended anything successfully. You are going to attack and attack some more." So that's the vibe you're going to get with this defense. So they're going to play a hybrid front with lots of man coverage. They're going to blitz. They're going to disguise their coverages. I went back. I watched the All-22 from this weekend's game against the 49ers, and Tennessee basically showed too high pre-snap, morphed into something completely different post-snap like cover 3. The blitz rate for a preseason game against backups was 39%, and they're pretty exotic. I personally like being able to see this. I'm just a little surprised Wilson showing this in the preseason when you have a rookie QB on your schedule making his debut week 1. That's probably the time to unveil the exotic pressures and disguised coverages when nobody quite knows what you're doing as a first-time defensive coordinator, but I guess neither here nor there. With this style of defense, it makes sense to actually start in the back because there's going to be a lot of pressure on the corners to win those one-on-one, man-to-man battles. You mentioned the L'Jarius Sneed trade. He is a man-cover corner. He runs 4.3, has 95th percentile vertical, 79-inch wingspan. He is a scheme fit. Allowed just 5 yards per target last season. Roger McCreary was a second-round pick in 2022. He made a real leap in the slot last year. 6 havoc plays created through the year to 0 touchdowns allowed. Chidobe Awuzie was brought in. If he gets back to the 2021-2022 form, it's going to be a great signing. We didn't expect a ton last season. We mentioned it in the Bengals preview. He was recovering from an ACL tear. That is a tough injury for a DB to come back from right away. He's also missed part of this camp with a calf injury, so let's monitor that leading up to week 1. You have rookie Jarvis Brownlee, who's flashed in camp at corner as well. Dog mentality. Fantastic tackler for a corner, just not an elite athlete or measurables guy. That's why he dropped in the draft. The safety group has 4 veterans. Amani Hooker and Elijah Moldner back. I mean, Hooker had another solid season. You got to get him back to his 2021 form. Still an above replacement level player. Quandre Diggs was signed last week. Another guy looking to kind of return to his old form. A familiar name is Jamal Adams. He was in New York with Denard Wilson, so lots of familiarity there. Those two are hoping to kind of recapture some of the old magic together, let's say. And one thing Wilson said, which you like, he's asking players to do something within his defense they're good at, magnify their best attributes. So I assumed that means even though Adams is listed as a safety, he's going to play in the box, he's going to be a blitzer, maybe used as a coverage linebacker. But, there's only one way for the Titans secondary to go. You mentioned it. They finished 24th in schedule-adjusted pass defense last season. Similar situation at linebacker. Titans signed Kenneth Murray. He's been a bust to this point. My guess is Murray's going to be asked to run in a straight line and be a blitzer. Aside from that, there's very little he's shown he can do. Azeez was a monster loss, as we mentioned. Everything I'm hearing is that Denard Wilson's preparing Cedric Gray to start at some point very early in this season. Could be as early as game 1. They gave Gray the ability to call plays early in camp. He's dealing with a minor injury right now, though. Jack Gibbons is the third backer in those 3-4 looks. He improved from his rookie season. Most of the improvement came playing downhill, right? His missed tackle rate cut in half to 6%. He's a well above average run defender, but like Murray, Gibbons is kind of a massive liability in coverage, so they're going to have to get that figured out. Up front, man, this is, to me, an interesting group. I love the idea of pairing Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat side by side. That's really fun. And Simmons is just a beast, right? 15th in pass rush run rate among tackles last year. Did take a slight step back against the run. Sweat has been great to elite as a run defender at Texas for the last 4 years. Graded out the very best P5 run defender last season and actually showed an ability to create pressure, 11% on pass rush snaps. The rest of the Titans front comes with questions or concerns, right? They brought in veteran Sebastian Joseph Day. He's been a slightly below replacement level snap filler. Marlon Davidson heads into year 4. He's just been, disappointing as a second-round pick. Maybe a change of scenery, a different voice helps him realize his potential. And it's why I mentioned Denard Wilson's blitz packages. Maybe the natural pressure becomes a question mark. Arden Key is suspended 6 games for PEDs. He finished 13th in pass rush win rate, so maybe that's not as big of a question when he's back out there. Harold Landry comes... he's got to have a big year, right? When I look at him, he's really interesting. The metrics don't suggest anything more than an above-average player. Then you see the surface-level stats, and it's like, another 10-plus sack season. He had 11 sacks last year on a 10% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. So it doesn't seem like that can continue, but it has. Rashad Weaver has been a disappointment to this part of his career. 3 straight seasons of below replacement level play. His snaps were cut significantly last year. The schedule of offenses ticks up substantially this year. Titans actually go from facing a bottom 10 schedule of offenses last year. It's above average now. When I look at the Titans, this is, to me, and we were talking a little bit pre-podcast here, they're giving pro bettors a lot to think about, right? Their offseason, to me, has been really bizarre, and our listeners probably remember us saying last year the organization needs to start pulling in one direction. Like, what's the plan here? Are we tearing this all down and building for the future, or is there a different path? And it seems the Titans are taking a different path where they're caught on the idea of Will Levis being on his rookie deal. So they've signed all of these veteran guys to compete now. I mean, the Titans spent over $400 million this offseason. It was the 5th most of any team. And so we've seen under money at 6.5 come in, but we've seen significant buys at 15-1 to win the AFC South. That's why it's only 9-1 now. The metrics suggest Tennessee underachieved last season. They played like a 7.2 win team. And then Tennessee also finds themselves with the 7th most favorable net rest edge this year. And now there's this offense that looks like it's going to operate in the year 2024. And you've spent $400 million plus improving this team. So I couldn't get there on the under 6.5. And from what I'm hearing is there's a very large group contemplating going over at a depressed alt number of 5.5. So another team here with a little bit of a battle amongst pros.
Hey, look, I mean, we saw it last year in this division. I don't think anybody believed that the Houston Texans, with their win total coming in right around 6 to start the season, were going to be able to go out there and win the division with a long shot price tag. They were able to achieve it, but with a target on their back, we know what the roster looks like at Houston. We know what Indianapolis expects. There's still questions for the Jags to answer. Maybe it's Tennessee coming from off the pace that can really surprise some folks. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Payne, best bet portion of the program. I know we said as we got closer towards the end of these division previews, we weren't going to start to fire recklessly into the markets without positions we've already taken. Anything that's caught your eye in this regard, we're sharing with our core listenership.
Yeah, as usual, right? The market tightens a little bit as we see some evolution, and so props become a little bit interesting. Let's go to something we've already bet. The market is still pretty in line with that, and we're kind of doubling down on an idea we had a little bit earlier in our previews. And don't go nuts with this, but let's take a little flyer here on Jalen Hurts to win MVP at 16-1. Something we discussed back in the NFC East preview was the schedule of defenses that the Eagles play this year. 25th in terms of pass defense, 29th in terms of run defense. And then you think about the adult in the room at coordinator, and you have Kellen Moore now, who is leading the show. He's ran nothing but top 5 offenses. He also runs an offense that will increase the play volume year over year, which enhances the opportunities rather than the methodical offense Philly ran last season. So very simple, kind of, I wouldn't say doubling down, but adding a little ceiling exposure to our Eagles to win the division with Hurts MVP at 16-1.
Look at that. Jalen Hurts looking to return to prominence. Hopefully it comes with health that gets the Eagles to the top of the heap in the NFC East and allows him to take home individual honor as well. All right, my friend, another division down, another division on deck on Monday. I'm preparing 26 minutes for the Falcons, Bucks, Panthers, and Saints for us to get in and out with the shortest to date, which inevitably means it'll somehow become the longest when we go off on tangents. But anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we bid them a fond farewell, wish them luck with all of their NFL Week 2 preseason investments, and come back refreshed and renewed for next week?
No, that's it. Chat on Monday.
Sounds good. Best of luck, as we said, to all of our listeners for whatever you guys decide to do with your bets this week for Week 2. Remember, don't chase some of those line moves. You'll find opportunities that are out there, whether they're in-game, whether they're at the half. The preseason can offer upside, but it's not worth laying 7 in games where professionals have laid significantly shorter numbers. We saw line moves really struggle last week as well. So important to get the best of the number, even more so in the preseason where these markets are so volatile. So best of luck, but most importantly, as always, with a Jalen Hurts MVP ticket in that increasing portfolio, come early January, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.